These injuries are brutal, folks. They probably have you panicking, but not to fear. We dove in, did the research, and we've got some waiver wire pickups dialed up for you heading into week 7. And it's not just those trending names that are probably going to get snatched up on a first-come, first-served basis. Let's get into it. We'll start out with Chuba Hubbard. This is a stash play with the Panthers being on bye in week 7, but I bring Hubbard up because I don't think he's going to be available in a lot of leagues heading into week 8, considering what we just saw. Chuba Hubbard got an opportunity in week 6 with Miles Sanders out, but he might legitimately be the guy in Carolina now. He has outperformed Sanders efficiency-wise throughout the entire year, now by nearly 1.5 yards per carry. In his first start as the starting back for the Panthers this year, Hubbard had a better game than Sanders has put up all season long. We know that considering that these two operate behind the same exact offensive line, yet Hubbard also has Sanders beat when it comes to yards before contact per attempt. Now, being a running back for the only remaining winless team in the NFL is not great for somebody's fantasy production, obviously, game script-wise, but this guy is capitalizing in every aspect possible. He is racked in 13 of 15 targets so far, and as somebody who has operated primarily out of a backup role so far, Hubbard has already cleared 300 all-purpose yards and is on pace for nearly 900 in total this season. And that's assuming he gets the same workload, but he's been getting more and more every week. Even before Miles Sanders was on the sidelines for week 6, Hubbard saw an increase in snaps, and in week 5, he was right up there with Sanders in touches as well. This guy's rising. Grab him before you can't. Kareem Hunt is a pretty obvious one here, and unless you have a record at or below 500, you're probably going to need to put together some type of deal to get him since he's a bigger name and will be hot off of waivers rolling into week 7, but we'll give it a shot. Who knows? Walking through his timeline, Kareem Hunt is somebody who was beat out for the running back 2 job in Cleveland by Jerome Ford in the offseason. But even so, with Nick Chubb down for the season, Cleveland has maintained their reputation as a run-heavy team and is now working Hunt in alongside Ford. Now, if you remember not too long ago, Hunt was an effective backup behind Nick Chubb because of his pass-catching upside. So while the 12 touches on the ground and rushing touchdown that we saw against the 49ers this last week is promising, I'm just as interested in the extra 5.4 points we get in a standard PPR format thanks to the 3 catches for 24 yards Hunt had as well. Now, this was P.J. Walker and not Deshaun Watson under center, so take that with a grain of salt considering every QB does have their tendencies. But this guy is definitely worth a roster spot considering that he was one of the most involved running back 2s on a team in recent memory, and he was in Cleveland when doing so. George Mason is an enticing option for obvious reasons. With CMC exiting during the Week 6 matchup against Cleveland, George Mason stepped in and did enough to get our attention now for the second week in a row. For one, he's on the most run-heavy team in the league. Let's keep it simple. The Niners throw the ball just 47% of the time. They run it 53%. There's going to be opportunity for somebody like Mason. So logistically, he's already in a great spot. He also saw more action out of the backfield than anybody else. But again, Ray McCloud did break free for a pair of pretty decent runs, so keep an eye on that. But on limited playing time, this man in Mason has a touchdown in 2 straight contests and is averaging an impressive 5.6 yards per carry in 2023. The main key here, because there are so many unknowns, is to watch the status of CMC, and if he's out, look for reports from Kyle Shanahan on who will get the bulk of the workload. The second part of that statement is super important because while George Mason has looked the best so far of any reserve back, Elijah Mitchell is technically still listed as the RB2 on this team, so we've got to be careful. Tyjae Spears is another candidate, but we gave you the spiel on him in our Week 6 buys video. I will not waste your time too much beyond that. Let's move on to a quarterback that I see getting more and more respect as the season progresses. Derek Carr is not going to go out and get you 20 to 25 fantasy points per game, all right? Unless something major about his game changes, that's just not going to happen. Since his rookie year in 2014, Carr has never been higher than the QB 12 spot and has never been lower than the QB 20 spot. Now, that's not somebody who jumps off the page, but it is someone who's reliable. Derek Carr has missed just 4 games in 9 years. That's what you need in a serviceable, security blanket quarterback. Only 7 quarterbacks played in all 17 games last year. You need a reliable backup, especially if you have Justin Fields or Josh Allen out there right now. It's someone who throws for volume. He has cleared 30 attempts per game on average in every year he's played so far, and he's cleared 4,000 passing yards in 4 of his 9 seasons. The man is only owned in 15% of leagues, but he is starting to hit his groove. He has 3 passing touchdowns to 1 pick in his last 2 games, and he has cleared 15 fantasy points in each of those last 2 games. Carr's upcoming opponents are probably my favorite part about this pick. He plays the Jaguars, Colts, Bears, and Vikings in the next 4 weeks. Those first 3 teams are bottom 10 in the league in passing defense, and the Vikings are still in the bottom half in passing yards allowed as well. Chris Olave, Michael Thomas, and Raheed Shaheed all look great and are healthy on top of this. I love Derek Carr's situation. And let's talk about Raheed Shaheed. He'll kick off our wide receiver segment of this waivers video, and he's somebody who's been described as lightning in a bottle at times. Shaheed came out hot as the wide receiver 11 overall in standard PPR in week 1, but then he ended up finishing outside of the top 50 for the next 4 weeks before a bounce-back performance against the Texans this past week. Shaheed ran the third most amount of routes on the team behind Michael Thomas and Chris Olave, so he looks like that definitive third option. Now, targets-wise, here's what I have a bit of an issue with. Through 6 weeks, Shaheed is one of the more boomer must options. But there are 2 reasons you should go out and try and give him a roster spot. For one, the point I just brought up with Derek Carr still stands true. The Jacksonville, Indianapolis, Chicago, and Minnesota secondaries are far more vulnerable than what he has seen so far this season. My second reason, and the main value I think a lot of you can get out of somebody like Shaheed, is an immediate flip sell. That type of concept could work very well here. Sell this guy high off of one of the better performances from last week in a market where Justin Jefferson, Deebo Samuel, and other receivers are currently going down. If you're down in a certain position, go get Shaheed, pick him up, and flip him around, use him in a package, and level up while his value is high. Curtis Samuel has given us a level of consistency that's hard to deny at this point. His quarterback in Sam Howell is 5th in the NFL in passing attempts and 10th in completion percentage. So not only do we have high passing volume here, but we've got accuracy on an offense that has to go to work to keep up considering their defense has been so poor. They're allowing 29.3 points per contest. They have to get into an arms race to do well. And his favorite target around the pay dirt is Samuel, considering that he has half of the wide receivers' red zone targets in Washington with 5 of the 10 total. He's also tied with Jahan Dotson for second on the team in total targets, but has been the much more reliable option. He's scored in the double digits in fantasy in 4 of the first 6 weeks this season, and in 2 of 4 weeks without a touchdown, he has still gotten past 10 points. Now, here's something I really want to highlight. Sam Howell has been sacked a league-high 34 times. He's being pressured and has had just 2.5 seconds on average in the pocket among 6 qualified receivers on Washington. Samuel has the lowest amount of air yards per reception, so let me paint this picture, okay? Stick with me. When a quarterback being sacked needs to get the ball out fast, it's going to Samuel. It's going to someone who averages just 8 air yards per reception, more of a check down option, if you will, than heaving it down the field because Sam Howell doesn't have that time. Wan'Dale Robinson has quickly turned into one of the more intriguing fantasy options out there. Situation-wise, he's on a New York Giants football team that just looks horrible, but they could lose a lot of games. I mean, why am I saying that, right? Well, the offense may look poor, but they'll need to go throw heavy to work from behind down the stretch if they want any chance at putting some wins together. Robinson is the 3rd favorite target on this team, but he has racked in such a high percentage of his targets that all of a sudden he's an enticing PPR option. Strictly PPR though. Robinson is 22 for 25 on his targets, so he nearly has a catch percentage of 90%, which is off the charts, way better than the league average. Now, these targets have primarily been on underneath routes, as indicated by the fact that his yards per reception mark is under 7. But he did lead all receivers in targets against a tough Bills secondary this last week, and he hauled in all 8 targets. The reason I'm really optimistic on Robinson is that he's seen an uptick in usage each and every week. In standard and half-point PPR leagues, I am not a big fan for obvious reasons, but volume is volume when you talk about PPR, and I am curious to see how Robinson does against a Washington secondary, allowing the 6th most amount of passing yards per contest. I think the value spikes a little bit more, and maybe Wan'Dale Robinson is not available on waivers going into Week 8. Rashee Rice is one of my favorite picks on here because he's starting to emerge and destroy this 2023 stigma that nobody outside of Travis Kelce is a compatible receiver in Kansas City. Rice is very clearly the decisive number 2 option. He leads the team's wide receivers in receptions, targets, yards, and red zone targets, which he's top 10 in the NFL in, by the way. He has cleared 10.5 PPR points in 4 of 6 games this year. There's that consistency again, much like Samuel. The Chiefs are leaning on the run a bit more this year, but they've run the 6th most amount of total plays so far, so there is plenty of space for somebody like Rashee Rice to operate, even if he isn't the primary target. Not to mention, Rashee Rice has the best quarterback in football at his disposal in Patrick Mahomes. The offense was just confusing until we finally found somebody with consistent production who can catch a football outside of Travis Kelce, but I think we've got him in Rice. Rice already has 2 touchdowns, and he's been tackled at the 1-yard line twice. So, folks, we are literally 6 whole feet away from Rashee Rice not even being available in majority of your leagues. Let's take advantage before the numbers catch up with him. The Chiefs take on the worst passing defense in the league in the Chargers next week. I don't expect Rice to be a waiver wire option following what could be a breakout performance. I feel like a broken record talking about Jonnu Smith's value, but he is still not owned in more than 15% of leagues. What are we doing here, folks? That's less than Dalton Kincaid, Gerald Everett, Hunter Henry, Tyler Higbee, Zach Ertz, Kyle Pitts, his own teammate. The list goes on, but why do I mention those names? That's because Jonnu Smith has outperformed them in fantasy this year, yet they're owned in more leagues. Time and time again so far this season, we've had consistent production out of Smith. Smith came into this past week 10th among his position in target share, 2nd in receiving yards, and then went out, caught 4 of his 5 targets, and got in the end zone. We are a third of the way into the 2023 NFL season. I really don't think the claim that this is just some small sample size fluke stands tall anymore. Smith is still tied for second on the team in red zone targets with 4, and he is tied with Kyle Pitts. He's on pace for a career year, and he's the third favorite target for a quarterback with, say what you want about Desmond Ridder, almost 1,400 passing yards already. We've got volume there. We've got plenty of opportunity. Dalton Schultz rounds us out. Yes, he's owned in more than half of leagues, which is typically a range that would keep somebody off of my waiver wire pickups list, but that rostered percentage number is about to get so much higher. I would highly suggest you take advantage because he is quite literally going to be unavailable next week. The passing offense in Houston was possibly still a shock to many after so many people predicted that CJ Stroud and this team would struggle, but once it picked up, I feel like a lot of individuals just forgot about how effective Dalton Schultz was in Dallas. Now, you can make the argument, as I have myself, that Dallas is just tight end heaven. Jason Witten thrived there. Dalton Schultz thrived there. Jake Ferguson is looking great this season. But it is clear that Dalton Schultz is going to be a prominent figure here in Houston, and he's just talented. He finds a way to get open. He has 36 targets. That's 9th in the league among tight ends, and 7 of those are red zone targets. That's 3rd among tight ends. This guy is tight end 12 overall in standard PPR. His ownership rate shot up over 10% this last week, and I'm honestly projecting a similar spike considering that he's following his 3rd straight double-digit fantasy performance. Folks, thanks so much for watching. As always, feel free to comment any questions you have in the comment section below. Leave a like and subscribe if we're helping you out as we head into Week 7's fantasy action, and we will see you in the next video.